Welcome to Lecture 7 of Rehabilitation Counseling Theory and Practice 2. We will focus on systemic interventions, which is a continuation of Stage 4 of the rehabilitation counseling process. As a brief review, Stage 1 of the counseling process includes establishing the working relationship. Stage 2 of the counseling process involves assessing or defining the presenting problem. Stage 3 of the counseling process involves identifying and setting goals. And Stage 4 involves choosing and initiating interventions. And the conclusion of the counseling process is Stage 4, which involves planning and introducing termination and follow-up. Thus far, specific to Stage 4, counseling interventions and choosing appropriate interventions, we focused on affective interventions, which are those interventions that are specific to the way in which the client feels. We've also discussed cognitive interventions, which focuses on the way in which clients think. And we concluded with Lecture 6 focused on behavioral interventions. As we know, both cognitive and behavioral interventions are used in concert. And so for Lecture 7, we will conclude our discussions with regard to choosing and initiating interventions by talking about systemic interventions. Our objectives for Lecture 7 are to discuss the relevance of systems therapy. We also want to look at the various theories related to systems intervention. We want to examine fundamental tenets of systems therapy, and we want to conclude by looking at systems interventions that impact dysfunctional behavior. Right now, I'd like for us to take a moment and explore some of the relevance associated with systemic therapy. When we talk about systemic therapy, we're looking at issues that are beyond the individual. As I've said before, we as individuals do not function within a vacuum. We live within systems. We are a part of families. We're a part of communities. We exist in work settings. We're a part of a global community as well as a local and national community. And so there are issues that might impact an individual that may be more systems related. And it's from that perspective that it's important that we explore the relevance of systems and how they impact the individual, and oftentimes addressing the ways in which those systemic kinds of issues impact the individual's functioning. And so from that point, we will look at systemic or environmental issues. We will explore social influences, issues related to gender, culture, and race. We will also focus on employment dislocation and family or peer issues. All of these are among the issues related to systemic or environmental issues that sometimes impact or plague an individual and limit their functional ability, as well as their ability to live to their full functioning capacity. And the other relevant factor associated with systemic therapy is that it focuses on changes in any part of the system that affects the whole system. So what we know is that if any part of a person's system breaks down, it impacts the whole. I know Gestalt therapy talks about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, but if any part of the whole is dysfunctional or breaks down, it impacts the entire or the whole individual. There are key fundamental tenets that relate to systems therapy, and I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to focus on what they are. The first key tenet of systems therapy states that cohesive interpersonal systems develop a self-sustaining quality, also known as homeostasis. It's when all of these systems work together and function effectively that we feel a sense of homeostasis, a sense of being grounded. If any one particular system is out of whack, then it impacts the entire system. And if you think about some of the systems that exist within our lives, I've already mentioned a few, which talking about the family as a system, the environment in which we live, the place of where we work. All of these are systems. And let's look at one of the systems, and let's look at the family, for example. And if something traumatic happens within the family, if there is maybe a divorce or the death of a loved one within the family system, it has a tendency to impact other aspects of an individual's life. For example, the death of a loved one might impact on the psyche of our clients to the extent that they may not be able to function productively within their community. They may not be able to work productively in their work environments. And so it's important to understand that the different systems that exist within our lives are very interconnected, and that there is cohesiveness that exists when all of these systems work together. And when they work together, they are self-sustaining and they provide homeostasis. The cohesive system is defined by systemic rules. If you think about families, families follow certain rules. And some of the rules may exist among various family members, and some rules may be very unique to that individual. It's also important to recognize that individuals function within a network of systems embedded within systems. So it might be the family system, it might be the employment system, the community in which they live, the state in which they live, the region, the continent, religious kinds of systems. And so when we work with clients, they represent a myriad of systems. But also when they come in for services, it's usually because there is a breakdown in one of the systems that might throw the entire whole out of homeostasis. Dysfunctional systems sometimes develop deep, rigid boundaries. For example, they might have specific rules stating that you should not do this, or if you're a part of this group or a part of this family, this is how you should behave. If you work in a particular setting or working for certain bureaucracies, there are certain boundaries, expectations, or limitations that are placed upon persons in certain settings. Religions also pose certain rules and expectations for those systems. Our communities have certain expectations that we must live up to. And so in working with clients, particularly from a systems perspective, it's our responsibility to understand the various systems that exist within the lives of our client and understand implications associated with disturbances in a system or the multiple systems. Because as I just said, when there is a disturbance in one system or one network, it has a tendency to impact other areas. And just thinking about our economy that exists today, and for persons that might lose their job and they lose their employment, and knowing that employment is a part of the systems that exist within our lives, and from that system it allows us the ability to live productive, independent lives. It provides us with resources to be able to sustain ourselves as well as others. And if for whatever reason a person loses their job, the loss of that system impacts almost every other system that exists within that person's environment. The loss of a job or the loss of the employment system, albeit temporary, might impact the family system and the resources that exist within the family. It might impact on one's religious perspectives or affiliations. It might have some bearing on the community in which the person might live, because after all, if you have no resources to maintain your place of residence, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to maintain that particular network or system. And so that is one example how just our employment system can throw one's entire well-being out of sync. Thinking about disabilities, and if you think about someone that experienced a traumatic injury and the ways in which that impacts the various systems, how it impacts the marital relationship, how it impacts the relationship with the children, acquaintances and friends, one's ability to navigate their environment, the extent to which they're able to maintain employment, particularly that employment that they had prior to the disability, their standard of living, the places that they travel to for extracurricular activities. And so systems therapy takes into consideration the various ways that systems impact on the individual and how the individual impacts the system. With regard to systems theories, it takes into consideration a host of therapeutic orientations. For example, object relations is one of the systems theories that is relevant to clients with regard to systems theories. And object relations looks at the relationship that the client has with others, primarily significant others. And research shows that the relationship persons have with others is rooted in the relationship they had with their primary caregivers at birth and early childhood. So object relations looks very closely at some of the early childhood experiences and how those experiences impact the individual today, the extent to which they're able to develop healthy pro-social kinds of relationships. Family systems therapies or theories address the family system, looks at the different kinds of family dynamics and how it impacts individuals, whether it's families that have clearly set boundaries, whether families are enmeshed or more diffused in their relationships. And from a family systems perspective, there are structural family therapies that looks at boundaries and the extent to which family members differentiate themselves from others. There are some that are more strategic and focused and looks at some of the various strategies that exist within the family as it relates to triangulation, whether it looks at people being estranged from family networks. And then there's also systemic therapy that focuses on the family system and how the family system works in a broader context. As it relates to the various family therapies, they're all very interrelated. Many of them have very slight differences. And so family therapy or family systems therapies by and large takes into consideration the family, the structure of the family, the ways in which the relationships in the family support or inhibit or limit individuals within the system. There's also solution-focused therapy where the intent is to look at solutions or changes rather than focusing on previous relationships or issues rooted in history. And there's narrative therapy. Narrative therapy are the ways that we draw meaning from our existence as it relates to our relationships. There are two core systems therapies that we will focus on for the purpose of the systemic therapy. And the two of them are structural therapy and strategic therapy. When we talk about structural therapy, the focus is on defining the system by altering interpersonal rules and boundaries in a behavioral manner. So structural therapy looks at boundaries, the extent to which individuals function independently or interdependently. It looks at the interactions between the relationships within the family structure. And the ultimate goal of structural therapy is to provide persons the opportunities to have clearly set boundaries where there is the less likelihood of enmeshment among family members. Strategic therapy provides cognitive interventions as a means of entering and altering family members' conceptualizations of the system and how it should function. So it gets into more of the cognitions, understanding some of the beliefs that exist within the family and how the beliefs in the family system impacts the way in which persons function. Because as we said, just talking about cognitive interventions, we mentioned that it's not so much the antecedent, but it's our cognitions. It's the way in which we think about or make sense of certain things that determines our behaviors. And so with strategic therapy, it provides cognitive interventions that explores the family from a conceptual perspective and understanding how it functions in a broader context. There are three primary areas that are addressed by systems therapy. And the first area has to do with altering communication patterns. The way in which persons communicate with each other is very important. And as clinicians, particularly focused on systems therapy, we assist clients in altering their communication patterns in more productive, pro-social kinds of ways. The other primary area that is a key focus of systems therapy is structural changes, helping individuals to become more differentiated within the family system, identify some of their own personal goals and attributes rather than allowing everything to be centered around the system. So helping the client to become more differentiated, having more clear boundaries, being more enmeshed in some of the family or systems norms. With regard to strategic change focuses on cognitions and getting the client to change the way that they think about the family and thus change the way they behave within the family context. So exploring the systemic intervention skills, there are specific types of strategies that are of paramount importance. And here we have three that are identified, particularly from a systemic context. From a systemic focus of systems theory, one of the primary issues has to do with negotiating, and that's helping family members acknowledge issues and make compromises that serve the good of the family. Realizing that in order for relationships to work, to be healthy, that there is some give and take, and helping family members to first acknowledge that there are areas where compromises can be made, and also to help family members to be comfortable with making compromises for the good of everyone involved. There are also instances where the therapist will assist the client to alter the family structure. And with systemic skills, the focus is on recognizing and altering the rules and the roles that govern the family transactions. And if you think about your own particular family, there are certain norms and expectations that exist within your family. Just thinking about my own family, there are certain rules and expectations that my father has about what I should do for the holidays. That holidays should still be spent with him, my father, rather than with my own family, my husband and my daughters. And so it's important to explore the rules and norms that exist within the family, and also make decisions to alter family structures. Oftentimes you find people that they might say, you know what, it's better to just go along to get along, to not upset the apple cart and just make things work. And for many of us, that might be okay. But when clients come to us for services, when families come to us for services, it's because the status quo isn't functioning, and it has become dysfunctional to the point that resources are needed in order to bring about some level of normality. Joining proposes that there is the establishment of a working relationship with each family member. From a systems therapeutic framework, as the clinician, you pretty much join the family structure. You understand the interworkings of the family, the nuances of the family, what the norms are, what the expectations are, what the rules are. And once, as a clinician, you understand the norms, the roles, the expectations, as a clinician, you could better help family members to alter or make changes within the system. Continuing with systemic skills, additional skills that are most relevant are circular questioning, generating interactions, and recognizing coalitions. With regard to circular questions, it's important for the therapist to solicit the various perspectives from each family members. So finding out from each individual family member what their perspective is on the family, understanding their role and function within the family, understanding who the top dog is, who makes the decisions, who are those that follow through with the decisions that are made by the top dog, how these decisions impact the individual and the total system. And so circular questioning is very important in allowing all of the family members to share their perspectives, which allows the therapist to have a broader, more conceptual understanding of what the issues are within the family. And once you're able to understand the issues of the family, you're then able to move forward with solving problems that exist. Generating interactions involves treating family systems in counseling in a way that allows the client to observe the system in action. So this would entail the therapist observing the client, observing the functioning and the ways of behaving of the family. It's treating the family system rather than just treating individuals. So rather than focusing on the individual, it's treating the entire family unit, and by doing so, the counselor is able to observe the system in action and understand some of the limitations, some of the dysfunctionalities, some of the compromises that must be made in order for the family to function as a whole, as a productive whole. Recognizing coalitions. This requires the therapist to observe the family coalitions, the family cliques and relationships that exist. Sometimes what you might find is two people that team up against others, or it might be within a family context, it might be two people that have an alliance or three people that have an alliance, and others within the family systems is on the periphery. So recognizing coalitions by observing family members, observing their dynamics, and understanding how this allows the family members in the system to organize and control the situation, or to defend themselves from certain family interactions. So it might be the mother and the daughter developing a relationship or a coalition to offset some of the problems that might exist between the mother and father. Or it might be the father and the son having a relationship, a coalition, because of issues related to dysfunction in the marriage pertaining to the wife. So again, recognizing coalitions involves observing family coalitions or relationships or cliques that allow certain members of the system to organize in order to control or defend themselves from other family members.